Hello and welcome back to Answering Bart Ehrman. Now, I wanted to start today with a statement as to why we're continuing to do this. And that is because today when I was on Facebook, I continue to see people using Bart Ehrman's arguments. And so that's why Matthew and I are doing this, because people are using these arguments which are false, but they're referring to Bart Ehrman as an authority. And so they don't even check it. And so that's what we do on this channel. We check to see if what Bart Ehrman is saying is true. And we're going to continue to read our way through his book now. And so, Matthew, I'm going to hand over to you. We're in the chapter entitled A World of Contradictions. And we're on page 43, The Trial Before Pilate. Can you please read for us?
Yeah, thanks. The trial before Pilate section starts. We start with a comparison of Mark, our earliest canonical gospel, and John, our latest. In both accounts, Jesus is put on trial before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, and condemned to death for calling himself the King of the Jews. But there are some very interesting differences between Mark's and John's narratives of the trial. And then Ehrman goes on and he gives a summary of Mark's account and then of John's account and highlights what he takes as some differences. There was one point in the summary of they're okay, but there was one point in the John bit I think we wanted to talk to briefly. Sam, did you want to take that?
Yes. Yeah, so he gives a summary, as you said, of Mark and John and Jesus before Pilate. And he says here, let me just get it up. He talks about how the Jewish leaders don't want to go into Pilate's headquarters because they want to avoid ritual defilement so they can eat the Passover that evening. And then he puts in brackets John 18:28. Remember, though, that in Mark's gospel, they had already eaten the Passover the night before. And so, he's trying to say, in John, they haven't eaten the Passover yet. In Mark, they already have. And so even in his summary, his a summary of Mark and John, he's trying to say there are these differences. But if you actually look at it, there are no differences. So the Passover meal was not simply a one-night meal. Let me just read to you from Ezekiel. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, you shall celebrate the feast of the Passover. And for 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. So the Passover is a full week festival with meals every night. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover. And so again, Luke has that same idea that it's a week-long festival. And I think we've looked at this in an earlier video that they all say Jesus was crucified on the Friday. So look, that's just a minor point I just want to look at, because he goes on to bring out 3 points in particular. He gives his summary of Mark, his summary of John. His summary of John is reasonable. We've just shown where he's not very careful historically. But then he moves on to 3 points that he thinks are the big differences between Mark and John's account of Jesus before Pilate. So let's have a look at those.
Yeah. So the first one, heading on to page 44, he says you can find numerous other differences between the accounts if you read them horizontally, that is like comparatively. Here I mentioned just 3 and point out their potential significance. First, Jesus has a lot more to say in John's account than in Mark. In fact, he has sustained conversations with Pilate, speaking of his kingdom that is not of this world, indicating that he's come into the world to speak the truth, declaring that Pilate has no ultimate power over him except what has been given him by God. These extended dialogues conform well with what you find throughout all of John's gospel, where Jesus engages in long, protracted speeches, quite unlike the series of aphorisms and one-liners that you frequently find in the synoptic gospels. So as a first point of contrast, or contradiction is the word he wants to use, but what are you going to say about that, Sam?
Yeah, well, certainly in John, we do have Jesus speaking more. We have more of his words recorded for us in John, absolutely. But I just want to point out that in Mark, Jesus does speak and has time of silence, time where he's silent. And in John, there are times where he speaks and has a time of silence as well. So we see both happening there. I'm not sure really what you can make of this, except, John's just giving us more detail.
And we know Mark's gospel is especially fast-paced and summarizes things. It gives the shorthand version of a lot of things. So this is hardly a surprising observation, is it? The Sermon on the Mount, which is a very long speech of Jesus, is in Matthew's gospel, and not in John. So it doesn't seem very convincing.
No.
Second one, he says, second, rather than having Jesus flogged, so second contrast, after his trial is over and the sentence has been pronounced, which one might think would be the sensible time to carry out the sentence. In John, Pilate has Jesus flogged in the middle of the proceedings. A variety of explanations have been given for John's change of this detail. It may be because of what happens next. Pilate brings Jesus out of the headquarters to present him beaten, bloodied, and in a purple robe to the Jewish people and says to them, "Behold the man." For the author of John, Jesus is much more than a man, but Pilate and the Jewish crowd don't recognize it. Pilate and his soldiers are mocking Jesus by dressing him up in a crown of thorns and giving him a purple robe and declaring, "Hail, King of the Jews." In fact, unbeknownst to them, their declaration is true. For John, Jesus really is the king, appearances notwithstanding.
Okay, so his problem here is that in John's account, Jesus is flogged and then goes back to Pilate, whereas in Mark's account, Pilate has him flogged, and then we're not told about any further discussions. He's taken away and crucified.
Yep.
Now, I guess what I just want to point out here is that it's exactly the same order in terms of everything that's come before this time.
Yeah.
So it's exactly the same order. So there's no problem there. And again, John is just giving us more detail as to what happened, right? It's not a contradiction. So I'll give you another example. In Luke's account, we're told about Pilate sending Jesus to Herod because Herod was in Jerusalem at that time. Now, Matthew, Mark, and John don't tell us about that. It's just details. Like, they're not all giving the same details. They're selecting what they're going to say, and there's no problem with that. It's in the same order, so there's actually nothing here.
Yeah, I feel to sound a bit rude, perhaps, I feel like Ehrman needs to look the word contradiction up in a dictionary. This is the point where we've seen, this is his 2 points so far, and it's there's different levels of detail, different emphases. Those aren't contradictions. If you want to say that there's contradictions in the Gospels here, you're going to have to do a far better job of actually representing some, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Let's just keep going.
Yeah, third one. I'll read that. Yep. Finally, it's significant that in John's Gospel, on 3 occasions, Pilate expressly declares that Jesus is innocent, does not deserve to be punished, and ought to be released. And he gives a couple of references. In Mark, Pilate never declares Jesus innocent. Why this heightened emphasis in John?
Okay, so we've got there that Ehrman is saying that in Mark. I'll go for in John. So in John, Pilate says Jesus is innocent on multiple occasions, where in John he doesn't. And we're going to see he's going to try to ascribe. In Mark, he's going to try to ascribe some motive to that. But I want to say that he just hasn't read it. Just hasn't read Mark, or is just being deliberately dishonest. Let's have a look at what Mark says. We'll compare Mark and John. So here are the references he's talking about. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went back inside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him." Okay. When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." So Ehrman is right. In John, it says, it has these statements of Pilate saying, "I find no guilt." That is, Jesus is innocent. But we find exactly the same statements in Mark. And he answered them, saying, do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. And again, and they cried out, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. So it's just simply wrong what Ehrman says here about Mark not having the idea of innocence, right? And you know, it's just wrong. And it's almost as if he just hasn't read it, which I know he has. So all I can assume is that he's just being very careless.
Well,
He
just wants to skew it a particular way, I think. I mean, Pilate clearly protests Jesus' innocence and asks for information to the contrary, and there's none to give. Just because he doesn't say the sentence, I declare him innocent, or a synonym of that, it's obviously he's trying very hard for it to say there to be a difference here that there just isn't between the two. It's not a very compelling contrast.
No.
By those verses you just gave us.
And look, we'll finish up on this last point.
Yep.
Where he's trying to make this point that John is emphasizing the innocence of Jesus, whereas Mark doesn't, and we've actually seen that that's just false.
Mm-hmm.
But he then says, scholars have long noted that John is in many ways the most virulently anti-Jewish of our Gospels. And so, you know, he's having this little dig here that, you know, this anti-Jewish theme, and you hear this sometimes.
Yeah,
that
you do.
You know, the New Testament is anti-Jewish. And yeah, I mean, we had a few points we wanted to say there. I mean, the first one I wanted to bring up is this is a book written by a Jewish man. So John is Jewish. So this is an internal Jewish, you know, critique of themselves.
Yeah.
And secondly, the New Testament does say that the Jewish people killed Jesus. It records that. But the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures record exactly the same thing. You go and read the book of Kings or the prophets, and it's about the kings of Israel persecuting God's prophets. You know, you read the story of Jeremiah, and the king is throwing him down the well. He wants to kill him. And it records that the Israelite people did kill the prophet. So it's no different to anything in the Old Testament or to the Jewish scriptures. That's just the character of these scriptures, which are actually a self-critical type of scripture, where the Israelites themselves and the Jews themselves are self-critical in their own scriptures.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the text he cites from John 8:42 to 44, it doesn't actually say that all Jewish people are children of the devil. Like you won't find that statement. It's actually saying, they're saying, but we're children of Abraham, we're children of Abraham. And Jesus' point is, well, you're not acting like it. You're actually acting like children of the devil, and you're acting like the devil. He's talking to a particular Jewish audience and critiquing them, which, as you say, is what the Old Testament prophets did all the time. So again, it's fishing for the Gospels to have this kind of really negative anti-Jewish bent, which just isn't there.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we'll finish up there for today. So please subscribe to the channel. Go back and watch some earlier episodes if you want to see what we've been doing all the way through the book. And next week, we're going to be looking at a famous so-called contradiction, and that is the death of Judas. How did Judas commit suicide, and you know, what does the Bible say on that? So we're going to be looking at that next week, and we'll see you then.